Oh, I didn't see you there. Welcome back to Elle's Sci-Fi Book Club. I am Elle Cordova.
And I'm Grace Yost.
And we are reading the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin this month. And we have read it. We read it by the skin of our teeth. Both of us barely finished. Grace, I think I finished as she was deplaning, as she was getting into L.A.
Right. And I finished in the airport on the way to L.A. A longer book. We are reading. I like that. That's, basically just closed the book yesterday.
Yeah. So hopefully it's all fresh in our minds because of that. So that's
absolutely.
Nice. Yeah.
You don't want to read the book too soon, as everyone knows with book clubs, because then you'll forget all the details and then you won't be able to keep up with the conversation.
Exactly.
But then if you wait, then it perhaps was a little stressful to finish.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But we did. So
we did. And it is a pretty quick read. I got really immersed in it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. I was really glad that we finally are kind of getting around to this particular type of story in this book club, because we've really kind of focused so far on, I would say, more traditional science fiction, hard science fiction. We flirted a little bit with fantasy, I think, with Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula K. Le Guin. We flirted with it. And then, of course, we flirted with the climate disaster, post-apocalypse with Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. But this really is the first time we're really kind of leaning hard into fantasy, sort of the junction between fantasy and science fiction. So this is a change of pace.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And another, I guess, our last book was also pretty recent. This is also a relatively recent book. And we've read a lot of historical science fiction, so that's cool.
It's true. Something from the 21st century, which is nice.
Yes.
In a few ways, and we'll get into that. So just to recap, this is the 5th season. It takes place in a world, a secondary world, secondary kind of Earth, in which you have periodic natural disasters that happen every few years. Some sort of cataclysmic event will happen that will basically bring about the end of civilization or put people in a sort of a post-apocalyptic survival mode. Those events usher in a time that's called the 5th season. So, and I think of that as there's spring, summer, fall, winter. I think she says this in one of those end chapter stone lore things. And then the 5th season is death.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so these things happen in this world. It's a very tumultuous world. There's a constant threat of disaster. And within this world, you've got people, just normal humans, who are called stills. The continent, I think, is called the stillness, even though it's anything but still, she says. And then you also have other people who have special abilities that are called origines. They're able to manipulate seismology and kinetic energy and things from the earth to move mountains and to quell tsunamis and basically they have control, so almost like a god level control over natural forces depending on their level of skill. It's also specifically, more personally, the tale of one woman and her journey in this world. All kinds of crazy and often traumatic and bad things happen to her, and we find out pretty late in the book actually that we're reading about this woman the whole time.
Right, kind of an unusual book in that regard, in several regards, but that we have 3 different perspectives that are in fact all essentially, well, not quite, but it's all about the same person, which is an interesting literary tactic.
Yeah, she employs a few interesting literary tactics, and I think we'll get into this more in depth. But that in particular really stuck out to me. And it sort of reminded me of an igneous rock that goes through periods of change and in response to its environmental pressure, the literal pressure changes, temperature changes, this rock will change over time. That's kind of how I thought of this main character. You see her young, untrained, she's more innocent. And then her guardian breaks her hand, and there are these traumas that she goes through at the Fulcrum and then beyond. And when she's Sinite, she goes through more trauma. And by the time we see her she's been through a lot, and she's a different kind of rock.
Yeah, I think the chapter titles for, is it Cyanite or?
Oh yeah, Cyanite.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not a geologist, so.
Well, I don't know either, but I think that's what it is. But it's sort of cut and under pressure, and she sort of becomes a very hardened person.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, facing all these kinds of pressures, being kind of, being abandoned by her family, being in this very terrifying place where she's training to use these powers, but ever the threat of getting killed for not following the rules right, or there's so many infractions that could lead to her swift death. Just like the sort of precarity of the book itself, where everyone is really stressed out about some sort of natural disaster at all times. Some kind of season can come, and they're always thinking about that. And she's also kind of permanently on edge, thinking about, her role is always so risky, right?
Yes.
In various points in her life. So very unusual character, unusual to tell the story the way that N.K. Jemisin is telling it. But very compelling.
And then I forgot to mention, you also have this other race of people that are stone eaters, and they're more mysterious. And I think I'm sure that we see more of them as in other books, because this is a trilogy. And I've only read this first book.
Me too. And I think that is like, it's interesting because you were saying, well, what were you saying about trilogies earlier? It was an interesting point.
Yeah,
that you were
off
making.
camera we were kind of discussing. I was just saying, sometimes when you read a book that's part of a series or a trilogy, the first book especially will kind of stand on its own, just as a sort of a sampler of this is the world, but here's a neat, tidy story that you can enjoy even if you don't read the rest of the series. This is not that. I really feel like this is one of those examples where it's like she opens all these threads. Most of them are not tied up by the end. We still don't know what has happened to this woman's husband and her other kid that's supposed to be alive. So she hasn't found them. That was sort of the central journey she was on, and it's unresolved by the end. Even the last line from Alabaster, like, have you ever heard of whatever the moon, whatever it was?
Moon,
yeah.
I think,
which I'm sure that's going to play a huge role in the second book. A lot of questions are unanswered. We still don't really know what was his reason for breaking the earth, and working with that stone eater to do that. There are just a lot of questions at the end. Yeah,
I don't know. I am of two minds, because I agree with you that it can be nice to have solid ending. So, of course, the trilogy that you and I are likely to think of first will be, of course, right behind me, the Star Wars over here. Star Wars original trilogy. So you have episode 4, concise ending. Some business kind of in the background that could be explored. And then the other, 5 is an open end, and then 6 is a conclusion. So we have sort of this package. And then this is very different in that it leaves so much open. But on the flip side, I kind of appreciate that, because sometimes when I'm reading or watching something, it's not really clear to me that there should be a sequel, and then it feels it can feel forced. I think of, like, I enjoy is it Squid Game or Squid Games?
Squid Game?
Well, right. So the Netflix show, I enjoyed that. I thought that I liked the actors. I liked the performances. I think the first season is really great. But then the second season, all the, like, convolutions we have to go through to get our main character to go back into these games feels a little labored to me.
Yeah.
Or the Hunger Games is kind of similar. So it is kind of nice that here there's certainly going to be a reason for the other books to exist.
Yeah. And I think going back to Star Wars, the function of that being a very tidy whole story, the episode 4, was because he didn't know that he would be able to get funding for further movies, so he had to kind of tie it up.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. But there's enough there. It's just how open should the door be to making further. Making more money from whatever property it is, or continuing the story.
Yeah, it's a large story. We can't fit it all in the first book, and I think this is kind of more of a function of fantasy. You have very large epic tales. You can't really wrap everything up in the first book.
Right. I guess like, since it's fantasy, maybe my point of comparison should have been Lord of the Rings in terms of trilogies.
And whereas, and then The Hobbit, you have a very tidy story.
Right.
But that first Lord of the Rings novel, maybe not so much.
Right. Well, they haven't completed their big mission. Yeah, and that kind of it raises the question. You kind of alluded to this earlier. This is called, Elle's Sci-Fi Book Club, and we have been reading a lot of books that are very easy to just place in this category. This book is sort of, troubling the borders of the category of science fiction and fantasy.
Yes.
So what would you say is the distinction between those two genres?
The difference between science fiction and fantasy? Well, it's a blurred frontier. There's a lot of traffic between over that border. But I would say, the central first of all, the first clue that I had that this was going to be really kind of leaning into fantasy was the fact that there's a map and there's a whole glossary of terms, and it's really that sort of the lore and the long history and the different peoples and the powers and like, you know, having to sort of the intricate world building, I think, is like such a feature of fantasy. Science fiction often, it will take place maybe on another world, but many of the things from our world are just kind of already there. Like technologies might be different, but there isn't as much like lore to learn. So that to me is like one of the central distinctions. And I also understand like that's not for everybody. I think a lot of people probably in this club and beyond are hard science fiction people. I would count myself as somebody who really does prefer probably hard science fiction. I don't read a lot of fantasy. I've enjoyed, you know, certain tales like The Lord of the Rings, and I've read a few science or fantasy things that I've enjoyed. But for the most part, I tend to seek out science fiction that's more science fiction, you know?
Yeah.
Less fantasy. But this was really an interesting sort of blend of the two.
Yeah, I think that's right. Typically, there might be sort of there can be like an overwhelming amount of lore in some fantasy. And I think like another fundamental difference is whether something is explained, whether some impossible thing is explained, or whether it's left sort of unexplained.
Magic versus science.
Right. You know, in science fiction, so fantastic things will happen. So in Star Trek, they will, they'll beam down to planets, you know, in some of unless we're back in Enterprise, we don't have to get into all of the Star Treks. But in a lot of the shows and movies, they're beaming down to planets. That's kind of a fantastic thing. But then they have a kind of pseudo-scientific explanation, and we're led to believe, oh, this is a function of their technology.
Yep.
And it's all perfectly explained.
Or even the introduction of midichlorians in this Star Wars world.
Right.
You know, it's like that was a scientific intervention and not fantasy.
Right, and that is what that particular intervention we're talking about, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace from 1999, that particular intervention was resented by people who preferred that to be unexplained, who preferred that section of Star Wars to remain in fantasy.
Magical.
And then, right.
Like a gift that is not understood, yeah.
But Star Wars is also like this straddling the line because, well, you do have, you know, the Jedi and the Force and things that are, like even with midichlorians, it's not really explained why somebody is more powerful or less, or ideas about destiny or light and dark and balance. Those are still kind of left in a fantasy place. But all the time you also have a very grounded science fiction thing with spaceships and guns that work for, you know, laser guns and stuff that work, blasters that work in a specific way that is grounded in some kind of science fiction-y explanation.
Yeah.
So, and then here we also have that because we have origins who seem, it's there, whether or not somebody has it is kind of Jedi-ish, where like sometimes the child of an origin can have that power, but not always. And that's kind of a fantasy thing. But then we have the Guardians who have implants.
Yes.
When that's more of a science fiction.
Yeah, they
thing.
rely on tech. They don't
Right.
have the natural gift.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of why this does make sense in a science fiction thing. And weren't you saying that this is kind of growing out of a science fiction opportunity for the author?
I think I saw in an interview that N.K. Jemisin has at least once, and maybe this is an annual thing. I don't know how involved she is in this, but there's something called like Launchpad. I think it's a thing. I think it's run by NASA, and it's like a seminar workshop that reaches out to like media influencers and writers to sort of encourage more hard science to be like put into their works and to encourage like more scientific research and just being ambassadors of science, hard science. Mm-hmm. And you can really tell like there's a lot of geological, seismological like information here. She clearly did a lot of research. I think she mentioned in a different interview that she moved to Hawaii briefly to like study volcanoes, and she talked to a lot of experts, and it's clear. You really get a sense that there's a rich understanding, a bedrock, if you will, of like scientific understanding in this, which is appreciated.
Right. Yes, it was really fascinating. It's like you are aware that when you're reading this, that I think some of these things about plates and then various things that can happen like these feel very grounded in things that could happen in our world.
Definitely.
Yeah, but then of course this fantastic power of people to intervene feels it's an interesting blend. Real world science fiction-y elements like implants to control people, and then the technology with the
Those obelisks.
Oh yes, obelisks.
Yeah. And there are other like dead civ ruins and things from other civilizations. So I thought was a really nice touch too. You really get a sense in this book. I think this is one thing she does incredibly well. You get a sense of scale and history and time, and just the immensity of like this tale. You just imagine this is a single continent, and yet the long history and the stone lore, it makes it feel like very connected to its past. And I really got a sense of like this is a rich world, very highly developed world.
Right, in so many ways, like we're talking about the different types of people that you encounter in the story, and then, like as you're saying, a sense of the past, and then a past that is continually erased. It seems like the stone lore, that's the wisdom of how to survive a season, and then, but even that, it's like troubling for our main character. I think she's cyanite when she hears this, when Alabaster, her mentor / friend / lover / enemy / complicated relationship with him, and he's like, actually, like stone lore has been altered over time, and that's like, ooh, that's like their Bible for how to understand, how to plan for these seasons. So that was interesting, the idea of like them living in the ruins of previous civilizations. And then we have also, what makes it feel big is at the end of, I think is it every chapter, we have these little texts
From the stone lore tablets,
right, which I think to us maybe makes us think of a few different things that we've also read.
Like Earthseed, Book of the Living, from Parable of the Sower. I thought of that right away. These little like sort of wisdom nuggets.
Yeah, I specifically was thinking of that because it was like mostly from that stone lore, but also Left Hand of Darkness, which also has these other texts in the narrative. And then, it makes it feel big, it makes it feel very developed. And then, at least in our edition, we had the appendix of all these different terms, and then also the different seasons that had happened, some that are in dispute, the sense of washing away of civilization, only preserving some things.
Yeah, and I'll say when I see a map and an appendix and a glossary of terms, I get immediately sort of like, oh no, because it's just, again, I'm not typically a fantasy reader. I read things generally that don't involve maps and glossaries and things. So my first thought when I saw that was like, oh no, am I going to have to like pore over this to understand? You don't. And she does a really good job of weaving, these terms into the story that feel natural. It doesn't feel as expository maybe as it could. Right. There are moments. It's really hard to, when you're creating so much from the ground up, like you're going to have to explain a bit. But I think actually having the glossary in the appendix makes it so that you don't have to quite do it through the characters' voices as much.
Well, and that was good. So then you don't have to keep fishing around to try to remember, oh, what did that mean?
Yeah.
You can kind of get it.
Just look it up.
But then reading this makes me think, like, I should just... Because I really enjoyed this. After that, too. It took me a second to get acclimated. And then maybe that's also because there's some unusual literary things going on in this book as well.
We should talk about that.
Yes.
So Jemisin's doing some really interesting form things. So obviously the first thing you notice is that, or at least that I noticed, is that it's all in present tense, which is unusual. And then on top of that, you've got these certain chapters that are actually in present tense and it's second person. So it's for anyone who's not an English nerd, that's just the you do this, you do that. It's all told to you in the present tense. And that's a big choice. That's like, it really makes a statement.
Yes.
And what it makes me think of, and I think I'm getting this actually from Jemisin. I heard her say this, and I think it implanted in my brain, and it made it make more sense to me. She was talking about she's her whole life been like a gaming nerd, like she tabletops, games, and then like video games, and in that, like in that space, you're often being told, like, to set up the story, you're this, you're in a dark room, you're walking down, and here's how we're setting up the story. It feels very like immediate, but also a little bit impersonal. Like, it gives you space to figure out your own character and to move through it as that character, but it also it does a good job of sort of like setting it up with authority.
Oh, interesting. So like D&D stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, because isn't that how D&D works, where it's like, oh, you're doing this now, you do
you
this,
have a
you do this.
dungeon master who's telling you,
Right.
here you are walking through a forest, and now this thing happens. What do you do? Also, video games do that.
True,
Like, often
yeah.
they'll do that. Like, there'll be text on the screen that'll say, you this, you that.
Yeah, it's sort of weird. You feel like you have agency in this novel. And then also maybe you can connect it to the idea of the, like, all this deadness, everything's constantly in flux, and people are living very much in a present situation that is very dangerous and at any point could fall to ruin. And maybe we feel that. It feels kind of like, I don't know,
Precarious.
nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Precarious. It does. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I thought was interesting, though, is like, so she didn't write the entire book in the
Right.
second person, but it is all in the present tense. So there's a sense of like immediacy, like you said, almost precariousness. At any moment, this could all end. But why? What I didn't understand is why make it just Essen's chapters that are in this. Why is Hoa, as we find out later, narrating to her?
Yeah.
Just that version of her, and then who is narrating the other parts? That was my only. I was like, I don't know that I followed her logic on that.
Right.
Then again, it would have been really, I think, intrusive to have the entire thing written in the second person.
Right. It is like a highly stylized choice. Like
Yeah.
when you're not going to, it's not one of these writerly things that can happen that you'll just kind of enjoy and not notice. You're certainly going to notice, like, oh, I'm being told this story. It's
Yeah.
very strange. Yeah. And it might be a little overwhelming to have the entire thing. I wasn't sure on that either. I wasn't also sure why Hoa needed to, like, tell her.
I think that probably will be resolved, or like, that'll come up again.
Oh, maybe it will. Yeah.
I think we'll learn more about why it's Hoa.
Right.
Yeah, but that was an interesting choice, and obviously the other really interesting choice is that we find out that those three characters that we think initially are different people, they're the same woman, just in different parts of her life. And was that like a twist to you, or did you see that coming?
I did see that coming.
Okay.
Yeah. How about
Yeah.
you?
I'd started to see it coming. No, I didn't see it right away.
No, not right away.
But what made me think that this might be the case was when I realized that these events weren't all happening simultaneously.
Right.
And they were happening at different points in time. I
Yes.
was like, well, maybe they're all happening to the same person.
Right, because it's very clear when you're reading about Demaya and Cyanide, who are, of course, all the same person, that there hasn't been this big split yet. And so then you're thinking, okay, well, this must be happening
In
previously.
the past. Right.
And then just kind of the personality, I think, is kind of consistent,
Yeah.
sort of hardened.
I was like, why are all these women, why do they all feel the same?
Right, but they are.
'Cause they are,
Right,
yeah.
yes. It's interesting to see them, like, all of these stories have these climaxes, kind of horrifying climaxes, right? Where Demaya has the climax of the Guardian finding her, exploring, with the character that we later learn is Tonki. What is her name?
Starts with a B.
Yeah,
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Bijan or something.
Something like that.
But right, so exploring, going where she's not supposed to go. Guardian somehow gets like taken over by something, and it's like hurting her hand, and then she immediately is like, you have to pass your test right now, or you'll be out because you've done this thing you're not supposed to do. So kind of a traumatic ending to her childhood, basically, and then Cyanide. That story ending with.
Well, let's pause on that.
Right.
What happened there with that Guardian? Like, it's almost like the Guardian was like glitching.
Right, or like getting swept up in the power of the, what do they call it, the socket or something.
Yeah.
It was not her, and then
So it was being taken over by like the socket's power.
I thought
I didn't really understand why the Guardian was flipping out and like hurting her
No.
and like losing control.
right.
Because then her Guardian, Shafa, comes in and he's like, control yourself, and then the Guardian can't, so then he just like kills that person.
Right. Life is not precious in this
No.
world at all.
No.
So yeah, he suddenly does that. I thought it was that it must have been some kind of like the psyche involved in this technology, right? Because she seemed to have access almost to its emotions in some weird way.
Yeah.
I wasn't clear on that either.
Yeah.
Probably explain. I'm sure that'll be explained.
Well, the whole
later.
socket thing will be explained, I'm sure. That's another sort of question mark and mystery that's left at the end of this book, is we don't really understand the role yet of the obelisks. Now we know, by the end of this book, now we know that they can be harnessed like by certain origins, like our main character, Essen.
Yeah.
Like she's able to use them, as is Alabaster, to sort of amplify her power. She can draw power directly from them. She doesn't need to ice everybody around her. So that's interesting, but we don't quite understand the role of the obelisks and what that has to do with the socket at the center of the fulcrum.
Clearly something that was developed from an earlier civilization.
Yeah.
That the remnants are there.
And it's like broken. It's not all together.
Yeah.
Like there's the one central one that kind of caused the destruction of Alia.
Right.
Was broken, and it kind of hurt her when she tried to use it.
Right. And then she kind of inadvertently like blows up that whole city, right? Or I don't think she meant to do that,
No,
right?
no.
It's like kind of an intense experience where that guardian is trying to kill them for curious reasons.
Yeah. A lot, like I said, a lot needs to be explained probably in the second and third book.
Right.
But, yeah.
But then we have cataclysmic, her traumatic experience of that guardian, and then also the highly traumatic experience of her inadvertently causing the destruction of like everyone or most. They're survivors, but like that entire community that had taken them in is gone.
Alia.
Yes.
And then also obviously even more so.
Oh no, I mean the island.
Oh yeah. Right.
Mayev or something, or Miev or.
Yeah, Miev.
We're trying to get the names right, but there are lots of, we won't get all of them right, of course.
But the killing of her son.
Right.
And Inan.
Yeah. Did that remind you of anything? It reminded me of something very specific.
What?
When she basically is like, well, I'm not going to have my kid live in this condition.
What does it remind you of?
Beloved.
Oh, yes.
Toni Morrison, if you haven't read it.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of people here have probably read it.
Traumatic, heartbreaking.
But the idea behind that is like, loving your child so much that you would rather kill them than have them live in a terrible enslaved state. And of course, Alabaster's nightmare is that, like many of his other children, this kid will just be plugged in.
Let's talk about that.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So he's aware of what could happen to this kid.
Yes.
If they get a hold of him. And what we know from what we saw earlier in the book, there are these node, what are they called? Node maintainers.
Yeah.
Which are they always children?
I don't know. I wasn't clear, but certainly it seemed like he's aware that several of his children have been made to be this, to function
including
in this
the
capacity.
one that they came across.
Yeah.
That time. Yeah. So then it turns out that they're like sedated and just being used.
Right. For their instinctual ability to still various seismic activities, they're just kind of plugged in and
with like antibiotics, and it's really horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of really horrifying stuff in the.
She pulls no punches. Kind of like Octavia Butler that way, where it's just like darkness after darkness, and you're like, well, she's going there.
Right, but not in kind of in a very non-self-indulgent way. Like the characters are just living in a world where, well, that can happen and then you'll all die. Or like, well, you better not be calmless because no one takes you in and you die, or raiders might kill you. This very, like that kind of road trip element is very reminiscent of Parable of the Sower.
Mm-hmm. Well, and obviously the environmental collapse and, cataclysms. Yeah. But another thing that really struck me in this story were the diversity of characters. So you have people of all different gender identities, sexualities, racial identities, and in this book club, like where we're primarily reading science fiction, it is a breath of fresh air to read something that has diverse perspectives, and something from the 21st century. Something's not just about straight white men using technology.
Right, and it's anytime you have any sort of book club where you're reading older works, that is probably going to be a thing.
You'll come across that.
Right, and it doesn't seem strange at the time, but like now we're kind of we like it. We expect to have more of a diverse population.
Yeah, and it's like you have a heroine who is a middle-aged black woman, and then in a really interesting romantic entanglement with other very dynamic people. So you have, Alabaster, who is this gay, like ostensibly gay, very dark man.
Yeah.
And a really striking character, somebody of like immense power and ability, almost like unfathomable power, godlike power that the heroine herself, Essen, doesn't even completely understand. So it doesn't seem possible what he's able to do. And then you have Innen, who is this sort of burly pirate man, who is, I guess, pansexual.
That was the vibe I was getting. Yeah.
And then they end up in sort of a throuple, I guess you could say, which is, at first blush, might seem like, I think there have been criticisms of that. Like, I was with this story until the pirate love shit, sex shit or whatever. But I think that really does a disservice to what's going on there. I actually think it's interesting because there's obviously some sort of love and probably even romantic love between Alabaster and Cyanide.
Yeah.
And Innen's role when he kind of comes in between them is almost like a conduit for that love. Like it's a physical manifestation of love that they have together.
I like that because it's, another aspect of diversity I like about this particular novel is sort of unusual characters in relationships we haven't seen before. So, like, for example, Demaya and later Cyanide's relationship with Shafa, the Guardian, who's like, she loves him and he loves her.
But it's
he's dangerous.
Violent kind of love.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, I will, like this, you have to do everything I say. I might kill you if not. He's threatening, but she also loves him. That's a very unusual relationship, and he's an unusual character in that way. And then this, too, with Alabaster, where they're sort of forced by their organization. Well, not directly, but it's like highly
pretty
implied.
Much forced.
Pretty much, yeah. Like, you have to produce a child. So they're having this, like, joyless sexual experience together. So there's just no way that a love could flourish under those circumstances, except that they have this like closeness developing. So it's like the Innen's entrance kind of like dispels some of the ickiness maybe around the way they were put together.
The physicality of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they have these bad associations with like, we have to do this for
But you
the
almost
Fulcrum.
get a sense that they both pour the physicality of their love into Innen, and it meets in him.
Yes.
So he's like a conduit.
Yeah,
And then
I think that works
all three
really well.
become whole.
Yeah, actually, like that wasn't my, I really like this book. That I wasn't totally sold on the love triangle, but I like how you articulated that. That makes me view it more favorably.
And I think you don't have to be sold on it to understand, like, it has a role though in the story.
Right.
It doesn't feel like she just threw this in as like a gratuitous sex scene or something.
No.
Although she doesn't shy away from being graphic with that,
Just very,
which is fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just saw like a couple of people saying like, that lost me. And I totally understand that. I just think that there is a reason, and it makes sense functionally in the text, I think, for those characters.
Right. And we're also like in we're in a fantasy world where it seems like this isn't super weird. Like people are kind of laughing about it and teasing her a little bit, but they're not like, what?
Yeah.
On the island, they're like.
Well, this is the thing in fantasy. When you world build, you can kind of create whatever world you want, where the norms are whatever you want them to be. Look at Left Hand of Darkness,
Right.
You decide what's normal and what's not. And in this world, that kind of relationship is perfectly okay and normal. Also, we have a trans character, Tonki, who, that's like, again, it's like, it's cool that you can actually have diversity of characters in this.
Right. Yeah, people, you just don't read stories that have this level of diversity in the 20th century when you're overwhelmingly, we've been reading about straight white men. And that's just kind of what will happen. Any sort of historically minded literature is probably going to have that. But
Another thing I noticed, it kind of reminded me of, have you read Foundation by Asimov? Like those books? Okay. The like space, like they'll say like the expletives and stuff they'll say are like based on the
right.
whatever the book is about. And
Yes.
here the like evil Earth, or like Earth does this, or Earth whatever.
Rusting.
Yeah. I will say sometimes those kinds of things bother me. Like one of the stories in which it bothers me is like Battlestar Galactica. I've always hated how they're like fracking this, because there doesn't seem to be a reason for it.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, right, I know.
Right.
I always give you a hard time about that. But the fracking thing, there's no reason for it. Here, it actually kind of works for me, because it's like it ties in the elements of the world, and weirdly, rusting works really well as a like a substitute for the F word, although the F word's in there too. And it's an interesting choice to have it be Father Earth.
Right. Yes. Oh, yeah. We were going to talk about that. Yeah. That really stood out to me. I think like way in the beginning, I wrote down like, oh yeah, Father Earth, because of course, we tend to gender Earth as feminine here.
Yeah.
On our planet. It's this sort of giving, caring,
nurturing.
Yes.
But then capricious,
right.
which is like a sexist idea of women.
Right.
That women are capricious and they change their minds, or temperamental. So it's interesting to have it be Father, and Father Earth, I think, as Stone Lore says, or maybe even pre-Stone Lore, like oral tradition, oral history says that there was a time in this world when the seasons were more stable. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it was the Origins or who it was, but they pissed off Father Earth by digging too far in and breaking it or something like that. So now they just have to deal with these seasons.
Right. Yeah, I think that comes up in... if you have our edition, I think it's 380, when Cyanide, I think, is mulling over this,
Well, and there's like this mention of almost like a Christ thing, where it's like they destroyed his only child. Did you remember that?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's like the...
Page 20, or page 790, or 379.
Yeah.
I was having a stroke. I was looking at the number and I could not say it.
I thought like... It's like, well, there aren't 700 pages, so it's probably not there.
Yeah.
If you're reading a different book.
I didn't have enough coffee, I think.
Yeah, I feel like a little sluggish. Like earlier, I just repeated. You said something, and I just repeated it back to you. It's like I'd like to add, and then I just restated it.
I didn't notice that.
I need to have more. I'm gonna have a big sip of this.
Yeah, take that shit down.
Right. So 379.
Yeah.
We have, according to legend, Father Earth did not originally hate life. In fact, as the Loras tell it.
That seems funny to me. According to legend, he didn't originally hate life. Now he does.
Once upon a time, Earth did everything he could to facilitate the strange emergence of life on his surface. He crafted even, predictable seasons, kept changes of wind and wave and temperature slow enough that every living being could adapt, evolve, summoned waters that purified themselves, skies that always cleared after a storm, and then on and on. Then people began to do horrible things to Father Earth. They poisoned waters beyond even his ability to cleanse and killed much of the other life that lived on the surface.
That feels like polluters. That feels just like run-of-the-mill pollution.
That's what we're doing on our Earth.
Yeah.
They drilled through the crust of his skin, past the blood of his mantle, to get at the sweet marrow of his bones.
And so what is that? That's what? Fossil fuels?
Right.
Something like that, maybe?
We're getting at the sweet marrow of the bones of our Earth, I think, in similar ways.
Right.
And at the height of human hubris and might, it was the Origins who did something that even Earth could not forgive. They destroyed his only child.
So there. What? His only child?
Yeah, unclear. I mean...
No moon? Is that the moon? Okay, I don't know. I don't want to be saying the wrong thing on the live stream.
The moon? Yeah, I don't know, but no Loras knows what this means, so it isn't similar, like you pointed out, oral tradition. This is like something even older than the stories and the wisdom they have passed down on how to survive the seasons, is this business of the only child. So yeah, it's a very, very much a Christ metaphor there.
Yeah. They killed his only child. And then...
I was wondering if it had something to do with stone eaters or something. Like if they seem kind of like, some of them seem malevolent.
Yeah, we should talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Stone Eaters and their role in the story. So obviously we have Hoa, who is on Essen's side, and has chosen Essen as somebody that he wants to like protect or be involved with somehow. He was like attracted to her. And so he was following her actually before she came across him.
And it's his birth that we see in that weird, or not, I don't want to say birth, but his like, he's like emerging. I think that must be him, right? The like stone boy.
Right. And then, and he seems good. I mean, he seems like he's a good thing, you know?
Yeah.
And then you have Antimony, who is maybe less good. She seems kind of evil. But then you have Alabaster kind of working with her and having a long relationship with her. He's dealt with her in the past.
Right, and then another one that they meet in the like Crystal Geode community. That's a separate person too.
I think that's
they're other Stone Eaters. Yeah,
I think she's separate.
Yeah,
too.
I think so.
Yeah,
but it's just they seem kind of like wild and unpredictable and highly powerful
and highly alien.
Yes,
like you just cannot understand.
Right, like the Origines are humans who have this mystical power, but the Stone Eaters seem like very remote from humanity and confusing, and have powers of like they can move through stone and
they can bring you through stone.
Right, which is
they seem to be turning Alabaster into stone.
Right at the end, and
like
then
his teeth have become stone, like parts of his hands.
Well, yeah, that kind of raised questions. I was like, can you become one? But I think Hoa seems good, and then what's her name? Antimony. Is that she seems like.
Well, we don't know.
Right.
Morally questionable.
Yeah, but they're sort of like part of the harsh landscape, unpredictable, and and then not really. People don't seem to know. Like everyone knows about the Origines and hates them, and and that's the sort of the Cyanide learning. She slowly learns about how oppressive and unfair the system is. She already kind of understands her place within it as Demaya, but I feel like when through Alabaster, she learns just the extent to which they're getting abused, and that it maybe didn't always have to be that. There are other ways of organizing societies.
Well, yeah, and I think it really, you could really do an interesting post-colonial reading of this book where you think about what is Jemisin saying maybe about slavery, about oppression, about taking a group of people and like enslaving them for their labor, their gifts.
Yes.
Yeah. And sort of demonizing them for being different.
Right, demonizing them but then also like profiting from their abilities.
Yeah. And what happens and why is it that Origines are in charge at the Fulcrum? They're buying into this system. It's like they've been brainwashed.
Right, and then there, of course, as it later explains, as Jemisin later explains in the book, it's like the Guardians are their children, or children of Origines, right, who don't have powers and then have the implants, right?
I don't know. Are they always? Is that always what a Guardian is?
Oh yeah, maybe it's sometimes. But that was like the connection.
Yeah.
If you don't have powers, then you might become a Guardian instead, and you have these other abilities. It's interesting how like she becomes radicalized in Alabaster's company, and it's interesting that he's the pathway to that, not somebody who's actually excelling in the system. He's got 10 rings. He's incredibly powerful. He's very celebrated, and yet he's like very deeply aware of the abuses of the system.
Right.
He knows what has happened to his children.
Well, and he not only is he accelerating in the system, he's gone beyond the system.
Right.
Like he's had to unlearn some of the things he learned there because it's so limited compared to his natural ability.
Right. He just has this like perspective. He can see his situation more clearly from like we're gods in chains and things like that. And then Cyanide comes to understand. She didn't really put all this totally together. She knew like her place is at the bottom, but she didn't really think about these things. There's like, and then she becomes radicalized, and I think I'm sure that will continue to be explored in the other books. Although I wonder if they'll still focus so closely on her.
Or will it be like her daughter? Do we, I'm sure something will happen with that character.
Yeah, the daughter who, that's the quest of the person who's in the present, Essen. Who's the same character, of course, trying to find her child and her husband who murdered her other child. And
right.
Or so we think, because I don't know if that will be complicated later. But, yeah.
And I just wonder, how realistic, if I'm going to push on it a little bit, how realistic is it that these incredibly powerful, like, demigods would allow themselves to be this oppressed.
I think it's like indoctrination.
But then when you see the Fulcrum, which I thought was really interesting, that's an interesting interlude. We really get to see the physical building, you know, and just see how the academy is sort of set up, because we've read, you know, Harry Potter, and you know, there's the magicians. There are all these different stories where kids with powers go and learn to use their powers. And so her take on it was interesting because it didn't feel like there was obviously punishment, but it didn't feel as maybe like repressive as it should to warrant like this whole race of very powerful people to be totally controlled. You know what I mean? Like she had the freedom to go around the grounds and explore. Like, shouldn't it have been a lot more? Yeah. Like the vice grip should have been harsher. I don't know. I just thought it was like, if I'm them, I feel like I'd be trying to organize. Right. You know, there's a lot of room, a lot of slack. They're allowed to like go off and like after a certain point, after a certain amount of rings, like 5 or something, you don't even need a guardian.
Yeah, I think I was wondering that too. It kind of fills it in a little with like just how powerful the guardians are.
Yeah,
originally
how
I was like,
terrifying they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're terrifying, and they have this ability to nullify their powers in the moment. And I think the like harsh punishments that they know, like if you step out of line, you will be killed, you know?
Or become one of those node maintainers, which is worse than being killed.
Right. Although it doesn't seem like Cyanide even really put that together. Or no, she knew it was a bad position. Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's
well,
a bad job.
She didn't know the reality. And I actually think to really like drive home why these people wouldn't step out of line, everybody should know that. Right. You know, that should be the threat. Like, oh, you'll be turned into this zombie, like, half alive, unconscious thing.
But I think it's like, that's the thing where you have to catch them young, kind of like Jedi, you know, where like catch people young and then very carefully indoctrinate them.
And if you don't catch them young enough,
then they're not going to be
not trainable.
Right. But it's also interesting, like the benefits and drawbacks, because both Cyanide and Alabaster are way more powerful and can do more impressive things than the Origines, that they also are on the island, who didn't have the same training, who are just the feral, and permanent, and just never had any
like
systematic. Inan and the guy who's the main leader that we don't see so much there. Yeah. It's interesting the pros and cons, and I think part of the indoctrination is this story they keep telling that Shafa tells immediately about. I'm going to get the names wrong unless I pull it up. I think it's on page 88 of our edition, where, you know, Shafa's on taking her away. He's taken her from her parents. They're journeying, I think, to the Fulcrum. And then, you know, Shem Shena, and then Misalam. So Misalam is an Origine. And then, so it's like this kind of, he describes this standoff, you know, an Origine named Misalam coming to kill the Emperor. Is not explained at first why he might be trying to do this. Mm-hmm. Perhaps he was simply evil. Perhaps he was mad. Perhaps he was evil. And he was trying to kill the Emperor, and then Shem Shena cleverly stops him from doing so and defeats him. And then that's sort of like the Guardian being able to defeat the Origine. Mm-hmm. And then later, Alabaster, who of course is awake to systems of oppression. He's much more aware than Cyanide is. He's also had the benefit of traveling more, which is when those experiences would encourage you to be more critical about your life. And then he alters it. I think it's 416. He explains like, oh, actually it's this specific emperor who was doing some cannibalism and had killed, I think, his children. Yeah. Right. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where I had a thought about Alabaster's motives. Don't you think this is like foreshadowing? Isn't his motive in doing this, like, he also has had a lot of children taken, not eaten, but taken from him, and then he's like splitting the earth and out of vengeance,
just destroying this entire system. Yeah, like trying to start everything over.
Yeah.
That was my interpretation without having read the second and third book.
Yeah, a version of that parable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or historical episode that has been mythologized.
Sure. Like that was an early echo of what he's doing now
Yes.
in a way. Yeah. And he's doing it because there's like he thinks the whole system is infected, it's poisoned, it's evil.
Right.
You know. And yeah, I also like how, you know, his character is interesting. He's reclaimed the epithet.
Well,
Roga.
kind of, though. I feel like I was going to say he did, but then, because I feel like, I was like, oh, is this akin to slurs? Like the one I was thinking of is, of course, the N-word.
Right.
But that has been reclaimed in a loving way where people would use that affectionately, and it doesn't, like, they've sort of sponged away the awful associations of that term.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's still, the associations are still there. It's more like he's using it to be honest about what their place in
Like
society.
never forget
Yeah.
how they see us.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's never used positively.
Yeah.
It's never like, oh, our
It's used
culture.
bitterly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bitterly. Yes.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of shocking to Cyanite to hear, but then she realizes like, oh, but we are this. It's been caked with civility, but this.
Yeah. And then you actually see Essen thinking it a lot. When she's thinking
Right.
of herself and others, she uses that term a lot. And you have to wonder like how much of that is, you know, Alabaster's bitterness rubbing off on her.
But maybe there will be a reclamation. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, again, in the next books of this, but
Yeah. But I think like the that's another creative use of world building. And
Yes.
these kinds of terms, it like really helps you understand like the role that these people play in this society. They would be called names and
yeah.
kept down.
Yeah, I think Jemisin is really good at having these like interesting little twists of like, oh, you suddenly find out more, you know, the idea that I think earlier in Interlude it's like, oh, people aren't really talking about islands and people aren't like oriented, like looking up at the stars. Everything's like looking down at the earth
Yeah.
and on that big continent.
And she has that moment, Cyanite has that moment where she finally sees the stars and kind of is almost startled by like, oh,
Yeah.
there is this whole thing out there. And some people believe those are suns.
Right. Or just even the idea of the obelisks up there, like suddenly directing up because everything is pointing down and rooted in the ground and based on their mythology and history.
As it would be if the ground is so threatening.
Yes,
Like
of
a
course you'd
ground
be
is
thinking about it.
Constantly like breaking open and trying to swallow you and eat you. Like
Yeah.
you're not going to be thinking about the stars and going out into space.
Right, and we get the first sense of like looking at this society from outside when they go to the island and see a totally different way of life with its own problems and abuses. Like they rely on,
Outside of the Sans Empire.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or what remains of it, right? Isn't it the empire is like kind of not there-ish anymore?
Well, I thought that they were the island people, that whole like archipelago. I was
Right.
thinking. Yeah, the whole archipelago of islands, they're just sort of outside the empire because they were never, it was too difficult to go conquer them and it wasn't worth it.
Oh yeah, I was just pointing out. I think the empire is not in place anymore.
Well, right, but
Right.
but all of its influences
the
are
lingering.
Yeah.
Yes, they're like in the wake of an empire that is now called something else.
alliance of something or other.
Yeah, and so they're like outside of it, outside of the whole system of knowledge. But they're also but they're like stealing from people, so they have their own. It's not like highly idealized, you know. And you
No,
get
they're-
the sense that it'd be kind of boring to live there.
Yeah.
Cyanite is bored.
Well,
you know?
they haven't changed in years,
Yeah.
centuries, generations. You
Yeah.
know?
But it sort of shows you that life on the continent is full of like people are very blinkered. They're not thinking about other ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
They're like all fundamentalists relying on stone lore,
Yep.
which they don't seem to realize like could be changed, or like parts of it, whoever survives can rewrite the lore to suit them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I also like the touch of like Eumenes being this sort of like haughtily designed, you know, sort of like almost like there's hubris involved in the design.
Yeah.
Like, it's like how dare they build with like asphalt and
Yeah.
all these delicate archways, and like it's almost like to say like try it, just try it, Earth. You know,
Yes.
we have the Fulcrum, we have these, you know, origins here to protect us. Like it reminds you of like Rome will never fall. And of course, it's the first thing to just completely go during the Alabaster's big breaking.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have that suddenly, because you're like, oh, okay, here's this really cool city, and then all of a sudden it's destroyed. But you do get to see it more in Demaya's especially, like, or at least the Fulcrum you see a lot in her memories.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk a little bit about like her writing style, her style of narration, not in terms of the form, but just what the narrator's vibe is.
Yeah.
Like it was interesting. It felt like a very personal way of speaking, of telling the story. You really got a sense of like, not just Hoa's second person thing, but like whoever the other narrator is, you really got a sense of like, almost like, I want to say like almost like flippant, where it's like she'll set something out, she'll say like, this is the way things are, but none of that matters. And here's a man who matters a great deal, so he does this thing, but that doesn't even matter. It's like, or whatever. Like she's constantly just, using language that feels very like almost like informal, is charged emotionally. Like the narrator's telling us how to feel about things. You know? It's not disaffected. It's like very affected. What did you think about that?
Yeah, this is a book where the authorial presence is very. I'm always thinking about that. I couldn't, and it's just an interesting, like not some other books like the authorial voice recedes.
Yeah,
and you start thinking about, you just get swept up in the story.
Or it'll change based on what characters are thinking.
Yes.
Like this authorial voice is the same throughout. It's very distinct.
Yes.
It's almost like a character in itself.
Yeah, it is. And it's very interesting. There's a lot of science fiction and fantasies like showing you wonders and wowing you like, oh, look at this. And so this feels it feels like a very deliberate choice to kind of keep leg sweeping you whenever you're like, wow. And then it's like,
Yeah.
Or just even like, I remember they get to the geode city. And then it's like, and you think it's going to be like, wow. But it's like the way she describes is like, oh, then I could smell the smells of like cooking and then garbage and like, oh, people are here. It's like all little
like undercutting it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like you're not supposed to get like caught. You're not supposed to be like, wow, looking at a vista. Really, you're always supposed to be taken down to earth a little.
Or the choices she makes for pacing. Like she'll say something and she'll be like, but, and then line space, but,
right.
but.
Yes.
It's like, and you really get a sense of, it's almost like cinematic. You feel like, the music screeches to a halt.
Yeah, she controls the tension very, very well.
It's interesting. It's just a different style. It's like, that's just not an authorial voice we've had in this book club so far.
No. And I do wonder, so I was just reading, I don't know if you saw this, but, well, at least like, I did read a story that she's adapting these for films. Did you see that?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. When did these come out?
This is 2015. I just looked at it. So, only 10 years old.
But I feel like it's such a big success. I feel like this should almost already be like a television series or movie.
Yeah, and I would really like to see it because I to be honest, like I had a little bit of a hard time picturing what's going on with some of the things like following like the diving into the earth with your consciousness and icing things.
Yeah, the Taurus. It'd be interesting to see how they visualize that. Like, because I was imagining, when people start their, when they start working the orogeny, there's like a Taurus that comes around them, which my understanding is like it's kind of a donut of like freezing ice or energy or whatever it might be. And then like the more skilled ones, they talk about like being able to make it move upward as a cone instead of outward to like destroy more people.
Oh yeah.
If you're trying to be careful, it'd be interesting to just see the visualizations of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it didn't make me wonder this kind of thing where her language, in the second person present tense, like that, I think will be that is probably maybe impossible to convey cinematically. But you could get it in the dialogue, I guess. You could get some of that voice coming through.
Sure. Although I think the immediacy that she's going for with that POV would just automatically be lended by the visual format. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't need it necessarily.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she's herself doing it. At least that was the article I read. But this was like from 2021. So I'm assuming it takes a long time to do all of this. But I would be very excited to see, to see, especially since she's directly involved. So
yeah, well, she's quite prolific. She's writing other books too, as she seems like.
Oh yeah,
and has written other series.
Yeah, and this one, my cover tells me, winner of the Hugo Award. I think, did she win a MacArthur like Genius? Yeah, she's really, really cool. And it's also nice to read a living author.
Yeah,
it's very fun.
Yeah, we've only read a couple living authors in this.
Yeah, I mean Ishiguro.
Yes. Actually, he's the only other one. think everybody else has
everyone
passed
else
away.
is and tragically young in certain cases. Octavia Butler and Douglas Adams.
Yeah. Also died a little bit too young.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now we have. So it's kind of nice to celebrate somebody when they're still alive and get to see a fantastic film, hopefully a series or TV series. I forget what it is.
Yeah, and I know she's won the Nebula Award too. I don't know if it was for this or another. I think she's maybe won for a different story. But she's quite celebrated, and you can see why.
Are you gonna pick up the other 2 books in the trilogy?
Well, I think probably focus on the sci-fi stuff that we've got coming up for the club. But at some point, I would. I need to know what happens, you know?
Right. Well, it's the same thing with the parable of. Oh, I know the parable
Of the talents.
can't be finished because the whole thing is of Butler's tragic death. Right. There should have been more. But here I do want to know what happens. What is the thing with the moon?
What is it? And then also, what happens with the daughter? And
Yes.
just a lot of questions. But
Yeah.
so at some point, I definitely will. But I think, so the next thing we've got coming up in this club, though, is Solaris. Next month is obviously October, my favorite time of the year. I love the spooky season, so figured we'd do something sci-fi, but that's also kind of scary a little bit.
It's a perfect one, and something that's more perhaps easier to slot into science fiction, but maybe sort of like a psychodrama too.
Sure.
Yeah. Interesting psychological elements.
Yeah, but we're gonna go way back in time for this one, so it'll be a different vibe. But
I remember. I think this is the one. No, I guess we had both read Hitchhiker's Guide, but we have both read this. And there are a couple of films to watch too, so it could be interesting.
And we should watch both of those
Yeah.
so we can talk about it. But so Stanislaw Lem, Solaris is next. The polls are now open as well for November, so make sure if you're a patron, go vote on the next book. And
also join us on Discord.
Yes.
The Discord is populated by a group of the smartest and nicest and friendliest people you're likely to encounter on the internet.
I know they intimidate me. They're
Yes.
not intimidating. They're very warm.
Right, but people. There are really interesting people from all sorts of different backgrounds and who have read it or it's new to them. So check that out. It's a really welcoming and lovely space.
It really is. So, and thanks to everybody who is on the Discord making it that space.
Yes.
But look forward to spooky season next month, and hope you enjoy your reading in the meantime.
See you then.
See you.
Why do you have all those copies of The Wizard of Oz?
Oh, well, I don't know. I think they're all for presents.
Oh.
So.
Yeah, everybody in Kansas is very proud of that. Very proud.
Yeah.
There's always it's like some states have a lot of things. Like in New York, they would never be able to have one thing they're proud of. Or here, California. But, in Wisconsin, we have...
cheese.
Well, I was thinking of popular cultural things. We do have cheese and beer and sausages, but we also have That 70s Show, and I think before that, isn't Laverne and Shirley set in Milwaukee? And then serial killers.
Oh, yeah. You have a few of those.
Yeah.